So here we are with the second set of poems, the first by Seamus Heaney, Digging. And as before, I'll start with a reading and then I'll do a brief analysis. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father digging, I look down, till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the lug, the shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the bright edge deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. Once I carried him milk in a bottle, corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge, through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. So, what is this poem about? Well, you can see that there is a literal and figurative meaning. On the one hand, it's simply about digging. Heaney is remembering his father and grandfather before him who used to dig. As we know, Heaney grew up on a farm, so it's likely that the speaker in the poem is Heaney himself. There's a circular structure, so we can see the phrase between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, is written at the start and at the end. And we can see that this identifies likely with Heaney. He indicates at the end of the poem that he'll dig with the pen. So instead of digging with a spade, like his father and grandfather, Heaney is digging in a figurative sense, using a pen, digging into past memories and trying to understand and come to resolution that way. So we'll go through the poem stanza by stanza. So there's an interesting image in yellow in the first short stanza, 2 lines after that part with a pen. It says, snug as a gun. So it's been said before that this image is the pen resting in the hand is similar in a sense to a gun resting on the shoulder of a man, perhaps. And this could be indicative of the Troubles in Ireland. Death of a Naturalist, the collection of poems, was written and published for 1966. And around that time, the Troubles began. Famously in 1972, Bloody Sunday took place as a protest against the government's policy of internment. And it was a majority Catholic protest as British forces killed 13 marchers that day. And that has been regurgitated over history with 3 different prime ministers undertaking different reviews of what happened to see whether there was murder took place. So it was a very difficult time, and Heaney would have been aware of it, though there's only one reference to that kind of problem, perhaps, in this poem with the gun. The next part, the next stanza, brief stanza, a tercet of 3 lines, under my window a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. You can see this is interesting because this is perhaps the only part of the poem which is in rhyming verse. So this is an example perhaps of dactylic pentameter. And what that means is that you have a stressed syllable and then 2 unstressed syllables following. Under my window, a clean rasping sound. You can see how there's a stress and no stress, no stress. And I would say that there's 10 syllables, so pentameter there. I also think it's somewhat ironic, this poem. It has an interesting theme. We see him looking back on his father and grandfather. And it's interesting in a way, as Heaney has broken the cycle of farming work that his grandfather and father undertook by becoming a poet. He was the first, I think of 9 children who went to university and took up an academic life. Unlike perhaps the previous poem we looked at, Death of a Naturalist, this poem I would say is quite a positive poem with themes of strength and skill of his father and grandfather. When he looks down in the third stanza, he sees the straining rump of his father bending low, stooping in rhythm. It's his admiration that he's looking at his father. And he has the nice imagery in the fourth stanza. They're loving their cool hardness, the potatoes in his hands. And in the fifth stanza, he uses the couplet, by God the old man could handle a spade just like his old man. So those are words of admiration there. It's poems about family generations, memory. It indicates maybe some identity struggle, but he is resolved and happy to be a writer. That's his way of working. And again, like the other poems we've seen it, it's a theme of nature here. So let's go back to the sounds and the imagery. In the second stanza, we see sound, ground, down. This could be an example of assonance, that repeated vowel sound of ow, 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 and that creates a kind of rhythm, which is then reinforced in the third stanza when he says stooping in rhythm. And the end rhyme, ing, ing, is also helping to create that poetic lyricism there. And we have repetition with old man, creating more rhythm, and a little bit of end rhyme with day and away highlighted in purple there in the the sixth stanza. And other imagery which is lovely, showing Heaney's attention to detail when he says corked sloppily with paper. This would be that the farmer maybe would go away to get the milk directly from a cow, and it not being manufactured or processed in a factory, simply corked with a piece of paper and then given to the grandfather, and he drink it quickly and go back to his work. And you can see that through the language, nicking and slicing, he clearly was very good at his job. I think there's interesting imagery here with the going down and down for the good turf digging. Listening to Heaney's interviews, this seems to be an indication of memory in a way. I think this middle part of the poem is showing how Heaney is digging himself with his pen and his brain. He's going back into his memory to dig for those good ideas for his poetry, in a sense. So I find that very interesting. In the next stanza, the cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap, you can see that onomatopoeic language, which is also there in the previous poem, Death of a Naturalist, with the frogs. It's very metaphorical. It has a lot of imagery. It draws the reader into the world of the poet. The soggy peat, the curt cuts, that alliteration, the CC, also helping to create artistic effect. And I like this idea of through living roots awaken in my head. This is showing that he's really engaging with his ancestors there, and nature in a sense is drawing him into their world. There's a bridge with nature. So that is the imagery of this poem, and that is Digging by Seamus Heaney. Here is the next poem, Mametz Wood by Owen. This is the last poem that we'll look at in this collection of 4 poems. And first I'll read it again, and then we'll talk about the poem afterwards. For years afterwards the farmers found them, the wasted young, turning up under their plough blades as they tended the land back into itself. A chit of bone, the china plate of a shoulder blade, the relic of a finger, the blown and broken bird's egg of a skull, all mimicked now in flint, breaking blue and white across this field where they were told to walk, not run, towards the wood and its nesting machine guns. And even now the earth stands sentinel, reaching back into itself for reminders of what happened, like a wound working a foreign body to the surface of the skin. This morning, 20 men buried in one long grave, a broken mosaic of bone linked arm in arm, their skeletons paused mid-dance macabre, in boots that outlasted them, their socketed heads tilted back at an angle, and their jaws, those that have them, dropped open, as if the notes they had sung have only now, with this unearthing, slipped from their absent tongues. Mametz Wood is about war and conflict, and specifically, Mametz Wood is the site of the First Battle of the Somme in 1916. 20,000 British troops were killed the first day of the Battle of the Somme. In this particular battle, 4,000 Welsh casualties, not to mention casualties of the German side, the Lehr Regiment of the Prussian Guards. And a little bit of context: the Welsh warriors, the Welsh soldiers, were apparently poorly trained, ill-equipped, and badly hampered by the tactics of their commanders. And you will see a little bit of this in the poem when we look at it. Writing for the BBC in 2010, Phil Caradis says the horror of the trenches and the surviving carnage of the battle must not be forgotten. And that is why we have Armistice Day, Remembrance Sunday on the 11th of November, which marks the end of the hostilities. In the background picture, you can see the Welsh Dragon monument in front of Mametz Wood, where they're laying wreaths, part of the Remembrance Sunday there. So that's kind of a very general and brief background. In the first stanza, there's highlighted there in purple the wasted young. So this seems to be the main message that Owen Shears is putting across with his poem, that of the young soldiers who died sadly in this conflict, and who could have lived had they not taken part, or had this conflict not gone ahead. For years afterwards, the farmers found them, the wasted young, turning up under their plough blades. This first stanza, in a sense, is also showing that the farmers are skilled, that they are able to tend the land, they are looking after the land. So there is a subtle positivity there. The second stanza, a chit of bone, the china plate of a shoulder blade, the relic of a finger, the blown and broken bird's egg of a skull. There's a lot of alliteration and consonants, that consonant sound which is repeated there, the ch-ch and the b-b, and the imagery, the chit and the china and the broken bird's egg is all fragile things, all of nature, and all of somehow something valuable has been broken by this conflict. In the third stanza, we have mimicked noun flint, and other commentators have found that mimicked is slightly ironic use by Shears. Normally, this word is used in a playful sense. You might mimic somebody making a face, but this is not playful. This is a serious and tragic situation. And in this third stanza as well, you can see where they were told to walk, not run. This is a subtle criticism and showing the historical context, that the commanders may have given them bad orders. And we have the image of the nesting machine guns, slightly ironic juxtaposition. Nesting is seen as very comforting and positive, and machine guns is obviously something that you would not want to approach. In the fourth stanza, we have, even now the earth stands sentinel, the earth being personified, given feeling in the pathetic fallacy. And this is actually quite a positive image, reaching back into itself for reminders of what happened, like a wound working a foreign body. This is a biological, a medical way of thinking about it, that the earth is healing itself, and perhaps over time, given time, difficulties and traumas can be healed. This is the first part of the poem, which does not have an obvious time reference. It's something that's happened, but given the title Mametz Wood, we know it's from the Battle of the Somme. In the next stanza, stanza 5, we see a change. So it's gone from the past, indefinite point, to this morning. 20 men buried in one long grave, a broken mosaic of bone linked arm in arm. And we have this idea of the skeletons paused mid-dance macabre. So this is related to a news story, fairly recent times, where people found, in an archaeological dig kind of sense, they found these skeletons. And the way it was seen from Shear's point of view, it looked like they were almost in a death dance. And this is partly his his message that it's such a shame that these soldiers never really got the chance to live out their lives and to go to dances and enjoy themselves. In the next stanza, in boots that lasted them, their socketed heads tilted back at an angle, and their jaws, those that have them, dropped open. So this idea of shock, that when you're shocked, your jaws drop open, and perhaps this should shock us still, that we should never forget this. And finally, as if the notes they had sung have only now with this unearthing slipped from their absent tongues. So I think that part of the message he's giving us is that we have to remember, we have to speak about this, and though they cannot speak poetry, Shears's poetry as well as other poetry such as Wilfred Owen's Dulce decorum est must speak to us. I should also say that in the first stanza, Shears starts the poem with an interesting kind of it's called in media res, which is kind of in the middle of something, and that helps to stimulate our interest in it. And I should say that this poem is written really in free verse, lines that have no regular meter, and it may help the reader sense that the speaker's thoughts are being expressed naturally and in the moment. So that's this poem, Mametz Wood. Now we move on to the mini comparison of those two poems, Digging and Mametz Wood, D Digging, Mametz Wood, MW. I think I should say both poems have this idea of reaching into the past, digging literally and figuratively, going underground, and Mametz Wood also going underground archaeologically to discover the remains of soldiers who sadly died in a First World War conflict. Both allude to war. Heaney makes a brief reference to conflict in his poem with the short couplet ending with snug as a gun, whereas in Mametz Wood, conflict is much more of a focus of the poem, suggested by the title itself. Both are free verse. Both poems use variable line lengths and meter in a modernist style, though occasionally both poets use standalone half rhyme. As I said, both poets deal with the passage of time and a kind of archaeological exploration. In Digging, over the course of 8 stanzas, Heaney time travels with his father and grandfather, who were Irish farmers. In comparison, Mametz Wood is essentially about wasted life due to war, in the 2 parts. The first stanza is 1 to 4, and the second stanza is 5 to 7. Importantly, both suggest positive properties, healing qualities of nature. In Digging, Heaney uses positive natural imagery, such as later in the poem, through living roots awaken in my head, in his personal poem. And in Mametz Wood, Shears describes the earth self-healing after conflict in stanza 4. Here is the overall comparison between the four poems, Death of a Naturalist by Seamus Heaney, Winter Swans by Owen Shears, Mametz Wood by Owen Shears, and also Digging by Seamus Heaney. Both poets frequently allude to the power of nature in their collections through personification and synesthetic imagery. What I mean by synesthetic is the use of many different sense impressions to put the reader into that situation. All 4 poems deal with memory and the changing nature of reality, whether it be digging into the past with Heaney's poem, or similarly digging archaeologically speaking and through memory with Mametz Wood, or in Winter Swans looking at the changing relationship, also the nature of memory, and in Death of a Naturalist, the changing nature of the relationship speaker with himself. Although the specifics differ, therefore, all 4 poems use relationships and say that they are important. Both poets display work which is grounded in their respective cultural experiences. Place is very important, Heaney in Northern Ireland and Shears in South Wales. Although both poets display modernist prosody, that idea of not using regular line length or meter, free verse does seem more prevalent in Shears' poem. In conclusion, these are my personal responses to the poetry. I feel their poetry, the 2 authors, Heaney and Shears, opens windows to personal yet shared worlds. We all have experienced some things either directly or indirectly related to what their poetry says. However, their poetry offers fresh perspectives, and as Heaney said in an interview, offers psychic fossil fuel. I like the use of nature as a tangible and powerful character in life-changing experience in their poetry. I also like the use of setting specific terms like Flax Dam and the title Mametz Wood, which inspire the reader and inform the reader. After reading these poems, it's often the case that you might want to go onto the internet and research the terms and find out more information. I like the use of carefully crafted modernist style, which engages the reader through vivid scenes and storytelling and doesn't necessarily rely on simple rhyme.